Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
State Representative Jimmy Anderson of Fitchburg is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 47th Assembly District. Jimmy, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me.
I have a pretty common question for legislators. If they're re-elected, top priority next session, sir?
It's always been pretty much the same for me. It's healthcare, right? And as we've seen with this really devastating pandemic, healthcare needs to be taken care of, and our hospitals need to be taken care of. We need to make sure that people are covered and not being financially destroyed by this pandemic. And now what we're seeing with what's happening at the Supreme Court level, the Affordable Care Act is at risk, and we might be taking steps backwards instead of forwards, and it'll be even more important for a state like Wisconsin to be able to protect its residents.
You mentioned hospitals. Should they be an even greater priority in the next state budget than they might be in the current one?
I don't see how we can't make them a priority, right? Whether it's providing the appropriate equipment for the nurses and doctors that are working in this area. We're seeing another large spike, and we're seeing the need for possibly more ventilators again. There's just so many issues that arise because of COVID-19 that require us to focus again on our healthcare workers and on the hospitals themselves and make sure that they're protected.
Well, somebody like you with your disabilities, this must be an especially scary time for you.
I know that a lot of people have written to me and particularly concerned about the loved ones in their lives that are facing various disabilities that make COVID-19 even scarier, particularly when it comes to home healthcare workers, right? I can't, I can try to be safe, but I can't control what my home health workers do, or who they come in contact with, or who they, those second and third level contacts. And so it becomes increasingly important that we do the important things as a state in order to stay safe, in order to keep me and other people like me healthy.
So you fully support the governor's extension of the face mask edict until November 21?
I think it's ridiculous that we have to ask that question. We've seen in other countries throughout the world, in Europe and Asia, that have managed to squash COVID-19 down to extremely manageable levels by doing simple things like wearing masks, contact tracing. It's not rocket science. Other people have figured this out. It's just that our leaders have chosen to pretty much ignore it and hope that it goes away, but we're seeing it flare up all across the country.
Well, what about pandemic's potential impact on the state budget? If I'll make up a number, if we didn't collect $1 billion in state tax revenues because of the slower economy, how would you make up that shortfall?
I think that first of all, accepting the Affordable Care Act, the Medicaid expansion is incredibly important. That would bring a lot of money back to the state that we desperately need. That we can then free up those other resources at the Department of Health Services to help with, helping our hospitals, providing the proper equipment, doing the things we need in order to combat the virus. But there's also, it's difficult because, right, like what you're asking me is like, how would you transform our entire tax system in order to make sure that we're making up these shortfalls? I think that there's a lot of places, the man and ag tax credit, I think, is often one that me and my colleagues talk about where we can get some money. And I think that we need to definitely reform the way that our income tax system works, go back to the way things were before Scott Walker and create even more, like a millionaire tax bracket and things like that in order to make sure that, those that are doing well are paying a little of their fair share.
When I interview candidates, many of them, Jimmy, say, if we legalize recreational and medical marijuana, that could be a source of revenue. What's your position on that issue?
Yeah, I think that we should legalize marijuana, not simply just because of the tax revenue, which is, a bonus, but I wouldn't call it a cure-all. I think we've seen in other states that it hasn't necessarily generated the kind of money that it was expected to generate, but there are other, the fact that it's safer than alcohol, the fact that, we often see people getting criminally, like having to deal with criminal records because of marijuana use, I think is just simply ridiculous. So I think there are moral issues why we should be legalizing marijuana, and the tax revenue is just, icing on the cake, I suppose.
As you watch the debate over policing reform take place nationally and in Kenosha over the last 4 to 5 months, the Speaker's going to have a task force. Senator Weingart has some bills. Black Caucus has bills. Are there any specific policing reforms you think should be enacted into law?
Yeah, I mean, I think that many of my colleagues on the Democratic side have been talking about this issue for what feels like a very long time. Like you said, I've only been there for 2 terms. This would be the start of my 3rd if I'm lucky enough to be reelected. I think that there's ideas out there that should be enacted already to help address this very important issue. And I think that, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think that what we need to do to really tackle this issue is change the way in which police get trained, right? Like I feel like almost as if they feel like they're under siege and not as if they're a part of our community meant to try to keep us safe. And so if we have this kind of warrior mentality, if they get trained as if around every corner there's going to be something that's going to attack them, then I think that we're seeing those repercussions happen in the way that we're being policed. And so, being able to change that training at the very beginning of when police officers enter the system, I think is a great way to try to change the way that we end up getting policed at the end of the outcome.
I think you support the Governor's People's Maps Commission. Why?
Well, I think it's going to demonstrate to the public how it is that maps should be drawn, right? They shouldn't be like a pull and a shove between 2 partisan groups. It should be, we want to keep communities intact. We want to make sure that when we're representing communities that we're not, drawing lines in the middle of cities because it's a way to gain a partisan edge or to get more seats in the legislature. We want to make sure that we're doing a good job representing the people that we're hoping to represent. And so I think the People's Commission is going to show how you're supposed to draw these maps and not necessarily how to best, hold power for a decade.
Wisconsin is a high property tax state, and that's why schools and local governments have been living with caps and limits on property tax levies for more than 20 years. If you're reelected voting on the next state budget, should those caps and limits stay in place?
No, I mean, I think that when we're seeing so many of our schools have to come feels like every single time to ask for more money because there's not enough in order to sustain our schools, there's definitely a problem. Like, we need to completely reform our state's tax code to make it so that way. I think you're right that we shouldn't be so reliant on property taxes, that we're broadening the tax base, that we're eliminating a lot of the deductions and the other ways in which the wealthy and corporations have been able to use those loopholes in order to keep their tax expectations low. But this is also an issue that, to be perfectly honest, needs to be had really at the federal level, right? What ends up happening is that states end up competing with one another over trying to get jobs or whatever the circumstances are, and then what ends up doing is it benefits the corporations, hurts the states, and so it's not a real way to run a country, if I'm being perfectly honest. And so, we need serious tax reform, not just at the state but at the federal level, to make it so that way regular folks aren't paying as much, so we're not so reliant on property taxes, but we're holding the wealthy and corporations accountable for the benefits that we offer them in our country.
Does that include giving cities, villages, and towns new revenue options? I'm referring to Representative Goyke's bill, which, if Milwaukee passed a referendum, it could levy a 50-cent sales tax. Do those local governments need new revenue options?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that what that bill is intended to do is try to work within the system that we currently have, right? So I get a little leery when we talk about sales taxes because they tend to be regressive, right? They tend to impact people at the lower end first instead of focusing where we can. But I think Representative Goyke is recognizing that we're working with Republicans, and Republicans don't seem to want to do the responsible thing to put the onus on, the wealthy and corporations. And so he's doing the best that he can to try to get the money where it's needed, because again, our schools are suffering, our roads are suffering. There's a lot that we need to do. And unfortunately, Republicans have choked off revenue at the state level for so long that we're now trying to find other ways at the local level to make up those revenues.
What about how we pay for highways and bridges? The governor wanted to raise the gas tax last year. It's 30.9 cents a gallon. Hasn't been raised in 10 or 12 years. Could you vote to raise it?
I would. And again, making sure that in the future that it's tied to inflation. So that way we're not having to constantly pass new legislation in order to make it, match appropriately whatever it should be in that year. But again, it's just more irresponsible managing of our finances, right? The idea that we wouldn't make sure that the gas tax is maintained over a decade is why our roads are doing so poorly. It's why we have to do so much borrowing. It's incredibly frustrating. And yeah, I would support doing the responsible thing in order to make sure that our roads are maintained.
One more question on the pandemic. Senator Capping and Representative Bourne just introduced a bill, I think it was 3 weeks ago. If your nonprofit, charity, business complies with COVID-19 protocols, you could not be sued over COVID. Could you vote for that bill?
No. I look, if you're going to put the people that work for you at risk, you should have to be responsible for those actions. Like, I'm not going to push somebody in a burning building and then be upset if they get burned. Like that seems crazy to me. And so I think that you should be required to do the responsible thing and make sure that anyone entering your facilities or your businesses, whether workers or people that are coming to go to your business or your nonprofit or whatever, do the social distancing, wear the mask, do the responsible thing. Otherwise, you're going to be held accountable.
And if a school district or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
I think so. I mean, I think that it should be within reason, right? That we should make sure that we're taking all the other factors into account. But I do think that if we're going to be spending Wisconsin tax dollars, they should be spent here in the state on our, small local businesses that work here. So I believe that there should be a preference, but there should be other factors taken into account.
Final question, differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to begin. I mean, I think when it comes to just the pandemic, I think we have very different ideas on what is and is not responsible when it comes to protecting people, right? Making sure we're requiring people to wear masks. If it requires another shutdown of our state in order to keep people safe, I think it's important. Actually having plans when it comes to reopening our schools rather than just throwing them open and just hoping that our teachers and kids stay safe. When it comes to issues of gun control, I think that one of his plans was to put guns into the hands of African-American people in order to protect them against the police. I think that that's a bit of a ludicrous answer when it comes to what we saw happen with Rittenhouse, where he was sitting there thinking that he was, I don't know, maybe he felt he was under attack and started shooting people. I mean, it's insane. I think that between me and my colleague, or the person that's running against me, I think that the differences are endless. And like I said, I could probably go on for an hour, but I think those are two really good areas where I think we're very different.
State Representative Jimmy Anderson of Fitchburg is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 47th Assembly District. The election is November 3. Jimmy, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Stay safe.
You too.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.